Hi, Tiffany. Thank you for sending this draft. And please forgive me. After I talked to you, I had basically endless calls this weekend with other students. And so let's take a look at this in light of what we talked about. And when I, this is the second, I think, file that you sent to me. So um, since we know that we have these sections at the end, they're not finished yet, let me take through this first part and um, and just share a couple ideas with you. First, in this first section, when you're talking about loss of innocence, um, you don't need to put quotes around any of these, just say it all straight. And so, for many, the idea of innocence, no quotes, is tied up with the thought of childhood. Just be straight. One rarely hears the word innocent in reference to an adult, except in a legal sense, blah, 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 blah. And even this can all go without the quotes, okay? Um, Here, I would join these paragraphs and just keep going. Their loss takes on a different form to put this into perspective, blah, blah, blah. And when you're offering a definition, let's not do Merriam-Webster. Let's do the Oxford English Dictionary, and you can even use um, the file of definitions that I provided in discussion, or you can go to Oxford English Dictionary in the Shapiro Library databases. It's listed under the databases because it's an expensive resource. Um, and one of the definitions will be something close to this, but include that instead. It's considered more scholarly and serious. If you're going to drop a definition in, drop it from the OED. And again, take the quotes off of evil here and go down. This thesis, I think, works, that through the story of four mothers and their daughters, the lasting impacts of evil in the form of war and deception can have on a person. This story shows us, right, the lasting impacts of evil can have on a person, and how sometimes even something positive, can lead to a loss of innocence. Here, just the connection between those two ideas is not explicit in the thesis, so we'll hope that you can draw those two things together in your essay. Now, some things that we were talking about in our conversation were this difference between summary and paraphrase, and digging deeper and getting to the next layer of meaning. And so let me read through some of what you have and say, okay, here's an opportunity for where you can dig in. And we can keep rolling with that. So the first major loss of innocence happens in the beginning of the novel. We always want to say novel. With the story of Zhang Mei Wu's mother, Xian Wu. She was the wife of an officer. During the war, her husband had moved her and their twin daughters to the city for their protection, then left them to go fight in the war. She described having to hide in the caves, the mountains around like wild animals. And we don't need the comma there. And here, put your citation at the end of the sentence, always. Citation format wants to interrupt your text as little as possible. And the way that they do that is you have your whole sentence that's a whole beautiful thing, and then the citation parentheses goes at the end, no matter where the quote appears in your sentence. Having to hide in the caves like wild animals as bombs dropped around them. And right here, I would dig in and say, in the city and in her previous life, she had never had to resort to living like a wild beast, but suddenly her, her way of thinking about herself in her own predicament, in her ability to tap into other parts of herself in order to survive, made her more animal-like, and this in itself is a loss of innocence. You know what I mean? You're just describing the quote in that next at that next level, and because you have the paraphrased version of things, and then you drop this great quote, but now explain that quote and say, what does it mean to live like a wild animal? It means that everything about the structure of your life has changed, and it's a reduction of your personhood, and that for a human is a loss of innocence. The caves, which at first were a wondrous thing to her, blah, 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 became the dripping bowels of an ancient hill that might collapse on top of me. And again, you can relate this back to, hiding like a wild animal when you start seeing things not as a thing of beauty anymore, but as both a threat and an imminent danger, and you see this interconnectedness and this anthropomorphizing of the natural world, and it seems both real and almost human and very menacing. She tells of arms and legs hanging from telephone wires and starving dogs running down the street with half-chewed hands dangling from their jaws. And then you run right into the next thing. No, 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 no. A powerful quote like this, explain that. So, what usually happens with telephone wires? What usually happens with dogs who are not starving? What usually happens with hands? They're attached to bodies. And so how has her world changed? It's not just an war as an abstraction that happens somewhere else, but there are these physical, menacing consequences, and that she has to live through them, and this has destroyed her sense of intactness and humanness, and taken away some of her sense of innocence. Then the news came that the Japanese were coming. News of the Japanese atrocities, including Chinese soldiers being hunted down and killed by the thousands and left in mass graves, was common. Again, you want to put the citation when you get it at the end of the sentence. And as the wife of an officer, she knew that she and her daughters would be in even more danger than would a normal civilian. Forced to flee on foot with her two babies, she heard from others as they ran past her of what had happened in her city, how the streets were strewn with newspapers reporting great victories, and on top of those papers, like fresh fish from a butcher, lay rows of people who had never lost hope but had lost their lives instead. I tied scarves into slings and put a baby on each side of my shoulder. I carried a bag in each hand until deep grooves grew in my hands. And so don't go ahead and end the story. This is where you have to spend at least as much time explaining that quote as that quote takes up space. And so here, before you say she ends the story, dig in, and this is your opportunity again to do that next level explanation and say, take apart the images that she gives us. What does it mean when you never lose hope? We always frame that in this Hallmark card kind of way, right? What does it mean to go and pick out fresh fish and to have it wrapped in paper and take it home? There are all of these images of normal life when you were innocent enough to believe that none of that would change. She uses these same images and unpacks them in this passage to describe a world turned upside down. And so what does this person do? She's left alone with her children, and she creates a way to carry the children and to make them sort of one with her body again, and carries everything that they own in her hands until her hands sort of cleave beneath the weight of the bags. And that's her new world. There is no carrying home fresh fish from the butcher. There is no more hoping for anything better. There's just living in this moment where everything is lost, including your innocence. And really, taking that long to describe that quote would be a perfect thing. So that's what I meant on Saturday by like going deeper. Describe it and then go deeper. She ends the story by saying, blah, blah, blah. Her daughter's shocked to realize the story she's been told is true. Ask her about the babies. And this is when you introduce it. And the mother replies, comma, quote, your father is not my first husband. You are not those babies. And here is where you might want to, we've just been talking about the mother's loss of innocence. This is your moment to dig in and explain the American daughter's loss of innocence in that moment. And I know that the novel takes this apart and gives you that description, but this is where you need to line up the mother's previous losses and the daughter's loss in that moment and see what in this person's safe American life is lost when a mother reveals something like this, adds that extra layer, adds the extra texture to the story she's never heard before. The war had cost Sion her entire family. And here I would put a colon and then have that list that follows, okay? Otherwise, this is a fragment. So the war cost her entire family, colon, lowercase h, her husband. The effect it had is summed up when Zhang Mei tells of how her mother started the San Francisco Joy Luck Club with the other Chinese families in the novel. She explains that her mother was able to sense that the women of these families also had unspeakable tragedy they lived in, left behind in China, and recognized the numbness in the women's faces. And instead of dropping that, this is your chance to again talk about the mother's innocence in relation to the loss of innocence of these other women, and again see all of that almost as a performance that the American daughter is watching. She sees this from the outside. She can't possibly get inside it and understand it. And then close on that kind of note. So I hope this is useful and this helps you sort of dig in a little, and then just, rinse and repeat. Do the same thing with the other sections. Looks good so far. You've pulled the perfect quotes, and yeah, I hope that this is useful, and I wish you all best, and have a great time this week finishing up.